look what we've done in your neighborhood, in your state, in your city. To know that Johnson Controls has a presence there is one of the amazing things. So throughout Johnson Controls' history, we've worked in a number of iconic buildings. Our company touted very early on its temperature control installation at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. This happened in 1896, the second term of Grover Cleveland. So we're talking quite a bit of time ago, but you find that image in many of its early catalogs. Fast forward a few years, this is the annual report of Johnson Controls from 1949. And in it, we see featured very prominently the United Nations building in New York. We find a few years later that some of the buildings that we see even today in Chicago skyline, such as the Tribune Tower, the Wrigley Building, Merchandise Mart, these are all Johnson Controls installations back in the 1950s. And if we fly over to the West Coast, to Hollywood, we find this very iconic building. This is the Capitol Records headquarters, and with the stylized records stacked one on top of another. And that was a Johnson installation as well. When we did some retrofit work, we did them in very prominent buildings. One in particular that made the Empire State Building much more green than it was at the beginning. That occurred back in the late 1990s. And finally, we also did an upgrade, and this is from our 1997 annual report on the Pentagon. And what's important there to realize is that back on September 11th in 2001, when the airliner hit the Pentagon, it was the Johnson system called Metasys that was able to shut off parts of the building that were filling up with smoke and fumes. And ultimately, it's claimed that many lives were saved on that day thanks to the Johnson system. When they can see these iconic buildings, it's very impressive. These buildings are seen by countless millions every year. And if we look at some of these old registers, for example, we see names that we see today that we're working with 50, 75, 100 years later. The wealth of information that they contain, to me, is one of the amazing things. That's one of the takeaways, the consistency in our customer base, in our relationships with cities, with communities, with school boards, as a company, to know that we have such longevity is very important.